Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close. We are back, and I'm excited because we have our guest, Guzel Lumpkin, who is the CFO of Innova Medical Group. I am so glad to have you back again. And today's topic is from the Controllership to FP&A. I'm just going to hand it over to Jotham Tai, who is the CEO of Gappify, and I'm going to let you take over and host. Hi, Jotham.
Thank you so much, Carmen, and hello again, Guzel. Thanks for joining us for a second episode here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jotham and Carmen. Delighted to be here with you today.
Well, we always have a lot of fun topics to talk about, and today is actually a topic that was very relevant for me at one point in my career. So a lot of us in accounting and corporate accounting especially, right? So if you're either in revenue or the controllership, and this is what I love about our profession, right? You can choose to go into so many different tracks. And so the one that we're seeing more of these days are people moving to FP&A, right? Because there's a perspective there that it's more strategic and analytical. So we would love to ask you questions about how you kind of thought about that transition yourself. So I guess just starting there, Guzel, like what was kind of like the trigger for you to kind of make that move in your career?
Excellent question. Thank you, Jotham, for having me, and really enjoyed our previous conversation with you. And I'll continue on building on to that story, really, and how I ended up basically getting my hands into FP&A. And I think, as I shared in the previous episode, it was kind of a methodical plan, right? And to me, it was interesting because I've gotten to a certain stage of my career where I hit controllership role. And the higher you go in your career, the more difficult it becomes to make sudden moves in your role without taking a demotion, right? And so when I would have those conversations with my mentors, the two options typically would come to mind, right? It's like, hey, you can take that zigzag or that trail in your hike of the career journey, where it could be either a lateral move or even something that could be perceived as a demotion when you're trying to acquire a new skill, right? Or there's oftentimes that you can just run into an opportunity where you know enough about the role and you have the certain skill set, right? You have that baseline skill set where you can be in a higher role without being in a previous role. So for example, how can I be a head of FP&A if I've never been an FP&A analyst, FP&A manager, FP&A senior manager? And that was kind of the choice that was put in front of me, right? And when I did switch in my jobs from Mindbody to Procore, the opportunity that was very exciting was a controllership role. But I'll tell you, within the first 3 months, luck would have it for me, right? And also an opportunity presented itself that the company did not have a built out or any FP&A function really. And in my previous role at a previous company, I've had my ears and eyes open, always in the meetings with FP&A, just being a sponge, just learning, right? And so it was the case of I knew enough to be dangerous with FP&A, right? And so what I did is I said, okay, I know accounting back of my hands. I know what I need to do. It's basically I have a playbook that I just need to hand to somebody and they'll start implementing, and I'll be there to quarterback and make sure that things get implemented right. But here, it's a new challenge. It's something that I haven't done before, but I have enough knowledge, like I said, to be dangerous. And so I raised my hand and said, hey, CFO at the time, it's like, hey, would you be open to me taking over both and having controller and FP&A under my wing? I want to build out FP&A function because there's an opportunity, there is a need, and I've got what it takes. And I'll tell you, I did not get right away, here's the title, right? It's like, hey, show me that you can do it. Meanwhile, we'll open up a position and see if you can compete with the candidates. And I think that was square and fair, right?
Yeah, you got an opportunity. It was probably helpful for that company to have that level of support. You got more experience in a new area that you probably wanted to get exposure to, but you had some background too. So one thing you mentioned there, and I think we in the controllership naturally can go into FP&A roles more seamlessly than someone from, I would say, iBanking to FP&A, because you know how financial statements are constructed, you know how department and account codings all work out. So yeah, I think that transition for you sound like very, very organic, and it's great. So I actually want to pull in Carmen here, and I didn't think about this earlier in the episode, but Carmen, what do you think FP&A stands for? Just as a fun question.
So that was going to be my question. So you just took it from me.
Take a guess though.
Well, I think it's okay, I'm gonna take a guess. Financial, clearly something there. Planning, no.
Yeah, no, you're
financial planning, and I want to say accounting, but I don't know. Accounting doesn't sound right.
Analysis. So analytics, right? So
the analytics. But that was going to be my first question, but I also have a second question, if I can just ask this. Is there I'm not sure how to ask the question because it just came to me, but is there a difference between men and women, just like in every other industry, regarding positions? So did you ever feel as if there was some kind of hesitance to hire you in a position that would be for a man, or is all accounting kind of an easier thing because accounting is accounting is accounting? Does that make sense?
Question, Carmen. Yeah, it's a great question. And naturally, I think, yes, there is. I think FP&A predominantly is occupied by our male counterparts.
Okay.
However, I would say I did not experience necessarily a disadvantage because I was a female. And to me, I end up working in tech, and typically comes with working with a lot of men. So I'm used to that. But I also like building my teams, and I naturally had nearly half of my FP&A team be females, and a lot of accounting team being females. And I think, Jotham, you've mentioned what you said was really spot on, because going into an FP&A with accounting background comes with its own really strong advantages, because and I think that's what I really anchored myself towards, because when I was bringing an advantage, or so to speak, a unique skill set into the team, because I knew how certain transactions would end up in the financial statements, especially when there's complex transactions and complicated accounting. And so oftentimes I would find myself in coaching sessions or lunch and learn sessions with my FP&A team, where I would teach them accounting concepts, be that ASC 842 or be that stock-based compensation. And they've enjoyed it. And I got to, and we would have basically exchange of information. Early analysts that I would hire that were very, very strong Excel modelers that could be intimidating sometimes, right? Yes. They would teach me some tips and tricks, right? So
that's interesting.
Natural exchange of information, right? And skill set.
Also, another just kind of fun thought. I always thought that as a Big Four accountant, and also being in the controllership, that my Excel skills were superior to FP&A. But I've seen some of those models, Guzel, like H lookups and some other crazy stuff. It sounds like FP&A has got some really serious formulas. Is that what you've seen too?
Yes, yes. And I think where now when I look for my talent, right? And this is something that some of my FP&A analysts and managers and my team members that end up spoiling me with, right? They would be able to put together a model without touching a mouse at all, right? Like simply on a keyboard. And that's some superior Excel skill.
Yeah.
So now when I look for my analysts and somebody, I have very high bars. Like, hey, can you model without touching your mouse? That's basically the question I ask on my interviews these days.
Yeah. How many shortcuts do you know? And Carmen, that's like a thing for us, like in both finance and accounting. Like, what's your Excel game like, huh? Like, can you do a pivot table without touching your mouse?
I'm learning so much.
It's an interesting world, Carmen, and I'm glad we get to share it with you.
I'm glad to be here. Wow.
Well, so I want to like double click into like more of FP&A life, because again, like I hope that the target like of the audience here are those that are considering moving to FP&A. And so one of the things that I used to be low-key jealous about with FP&A was like the amount of partnership you get with the business, right? You get to talk to different people in marketing and sales. And a lot of times in accounting, like in the controllership, we're only talking to these people if we need something. So it's less so much of a partnership. Do you think that's true, or would you say that's one of the highlights of being an FP&A?
Yeah, I think that is true. It's a huge part. And I think when I was building out FP&A at a startup, let's talk about startup, right? You know, you have people that typically your typical even executive in a startup could be there for a job as an executive. They may not have managed a budget before. They may not know what budget is, right? And let's face it, there is a big problem in America that we don't grow up with financial mind in mind. Like we don't think about personal budgeting. We don't have financial literacy classes that, you know, kind of ingrained in us. So oftentimes, you know, a word budget could be intimidating to your chief product officer, your marketing officer, or anyone in the company that's outside of finance, right? Or does not have the background that Jotham and I have, right? And so the challenge for me was, how do I simplify something and how do I build that partnership? And having, you know, an FP&A analyst and business partners, I call them, because they become that business partner, right? Is really a key that is able to make something that could be intimidating, lots of numbers, complicated spreadsheets, right? How do you translate in a simple words, in simple outputs, in simple goals, and something that an engineered mind person could understand? Okay, here's how what my activity and my team activity impacts the company's financial performance overall, right? Or our stock price down the road. And so I think FP&A analyst, successful FP&A analyst in my mind is not the one that just knows the Excel spreadsheets best, but the one that has that amazing partnership communication skills and could play that kind of
it's almost like advisor, right?
Advisor role.
Yeah.
And could be a guy or gal oftentimes between the CFO and the person on the other side, right? So not other side, but let's call it chief product officer, right? And chief product officer is asking for a budget. And usually the CFO's concern is how to get done more with less. And so this FP&A analyst often has to be an advocate for the chief product officer, but also have the financial and CFO's interest in mind and going back to the chief product officer, let's call it, right? I'm going to pick on chief product officer. So it's a very interesting role. And often for people that happy to have that type of skill set and could develop that type of skill set, right? Great communication skills, good people skills. and also at the same time, really good Excel skills, right? That's the most successful FP&A, I think, analyst in our day and age. And that's what separates, I think, oftentimes an accountant who's very numbers focused and confined to a room, oftentimes to an office, and doesn't have that collaboration opportunity even, right? And so if the accountant sitting there and says, hey, I'm really miserable because I want to actually develop relationships. I want to learn about the business. I want to go and have an impact on the business outcomes and not only just account for what already happened.
Yeah.
I think that's the time to consider FP&A role.
See, and now that you mentioned that, I go back to my days and I think I would have been good for FP&A because I do like that collaboration and I do like that partnership. And I definitely get that there are certain accountants who would rather just kind of plug away, right, at their spreadsheet. And certainly, like when I started my career, some accountants had the expectation that you go into an accounting job, you have your cube, your cube plant, you kind of just like crunch numbers away and never have to talk to anyone. There's definitely some people like that, but actually now, and I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, Guzel, like the folks that are coming out of college as accountants, they need that like collaboration. It's no longer acceptable, in other words, to just like be a spreadsheet person. Is that what you're seeing too from the younger, like new generation of finance and accountants?
I do. And I think that's where the challenge for controllers and CFOs is to keep the younger generation happy in their roles, right? And give them opportunities and to flex that muscle or to satisfy that thirst, so to speak, like to have the communication, to have that collaboration. And so often what I see is, hey, when you have a talent that's extremely valuable to your team and you see that they have the aspiration and also desire to be that more communicative, more collaborative partner-like person, you have to give them opportunity to transition into a role that gives them those, opportunities.
Carmen, I'd love your thoughts on this actually, and this topic that we're just talking about here, which is the trend of like accountants not being your kind of typical, shy and not as extroverted type. Like, is that kind of the sense that non-accountants still see about the accounting profession, or do you see that changing too?
No, I absolutely think that the stereotype still holds in most of the businesses that I've worked for. I do think that every individual person I have met in the financial world, in the accounting world specifically, tends to be much cooler than the stereotype would give. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, I mean, we're cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess if we're saying cool, none of us are cool, right? I guess that's the giveaway right there. But you know what I'm saying? I do think the younger generation that I'm seeing in the financial world, in the accounting world, do need that collaboration. That was something when you just said that, I thought to myself, like, wow, I kind of do see that in how you're trying to envelop that into their new job focus. So yeah, I find that very interesting. I feel like I've gone into the wrong profession. I just want to tell you both that as I'm listening to you, I'm like, it sounds so inspiring listening to you guys talk about this.
Well, I say this all the time. There are a lot of different like parts within accounting that you can go into. There's so many different options. And actually, this is a good segue to my last question for Guzel. So within FP&A itself, it sounds like there are new groups that are like sprouting up, right? You have like strategy and like biz ops and like these new groups. Like, do you see those as like different opportunities now? So in other words, if someone that's a controller right now is looking into FP&A, like are there certain like parts of FP&A that controllers kind of fit more naturally into, or is it still kind of like FP&A as a whole?
I think the different, as the company itself evolves, and I think also the coolness factor and the opportunity to collaborate also depends on the company's culture, right? So I just wanted to share that there's definitely companies out there that kind of frozen in a stone age a little bit, and that old view of accounting still holds true. But then what we see more recently in more I would say progressive companies that want to create those cultures, that stereotype no longer holds. To answer your question, Jotham, on different FP&A kind of groups almost, or subgroups, it depends on the company's evolution, right? And as it grows and as the need grows, I see, like, for example, I had to start with a small FP&A group that was a Swiss Army knife and did everything, did business partnership, did systems and operations, and did board reporting and corporate reporting, M&A support, what have you, right? And so oftentimes that what FP&A analysts really enjoy in a smaller company, because they get to see everything and not a teeny little area, and not be confined to account 1, 2, 3 or department that is, marketing or product or subdivision, right? And so that's the beauty of a smaller company, where you can have 2, 3 FP&A people and they can literally see the whole entire business, each one of them. And then as the company grows and develops and each area becomes more complex, there is a need to specialize. And so that's when you get to create, okay, now I need just 3 people supporting just corporate, be that earnings releases, board presentations, M&A support, what have you, right? And then you have business partnership, because you still need to support your business partners. And then they could be international and consolidations and whatnot. And then there is a system, because now most of the FP&As are getting away from keeping their budgets and forecasts and spreadsheets and going into the system. So often you need, no matter how user-friendly your system is, you need support for that. And so, but the person who will support that system needs to understand the formulas and all the inner making of the model that ends up in the system to provide you that support. And there is obviously a part of FP&A that works tightly with the rest of the business, be that revenue operations, business operations, whatnot. And so, yeah, it's very dynamic group and role.
Dynamic, but a lot of options again. So the key takeaway for me in hearing that is, if you're someone like a senior accountant thinking of going into FP&A, like, be mindful about like this company's size and maturity, right? So the smaller the company, the more widespread your responsibilities could be in FP&A. But if you want to specialize in one like specific part of FP&A, there's options to do that. So that's what I love about accounting. You have all these like career path options. And I think the main thing for us accountants is not just like being tunnel vision, right? And like sticking with one track. It's evaluating your situation and, hopefully making, amazing decisions to promote their journeys. And in your case, I love your background from, Big Four to controllership to FP&A to now CFO. So, really appreciate you sharing that with our audience today. It's, I think, incredible.
Thank you, Jotham. My pleasure. It's been delightful to be here and to talk to you and Carmen and just reminisce on the history. And hopefully this is very helpful to up-and-comers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been amazing. I've learned a lot. I mean, definitely, I've learned a lot. And I think this is not just helpful for people in your industry. I think this is helpful for people like me, who have a biased and a weird idea of what this life is about. So I appreciate you being a guest and being here, Guzel. Thank you so much. It was nice to see you again. And Jotham, I'm just grateful that you're allowing me to be a part of this as the moderator. So I am excited for the next episode. And everyone who's listening, please come back and make sure you check us out, Accounting Life with Jotham Tai. And in the meantime, check out our website, Gappify.com, and we will see you at the next episode for sure. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.